Um, One of the many profound verses in Rig Veda states like Ano Bhadraha Kritvo Yantu Vishwataha, which means let noble thoughts come to us from every side. What does this us truly signify? Does it point to the body, the brain, or the mind, or something beyond? The yearning we speak of is for noble thoughts alone. Yet, who is it that yearns? Is it the mind? Further, what is the origin of these thoughts? What indeed are thoughts? And what is the mind itself? How do we understand connection between these two? These are some of the questions we shall explore today over the next 50 minutes. I invite you to follow the examples carefully, for without that attentive engagement, the thread of presentation may slip away. Millions of years ago, humanity did not have mind. They were mindless, amanasas. Humanity was but an infant of Mother Nature, instinctual, dreamlike, unawakened. Self consciousness slept while instinct alone guided life. Then came the Manasaputras, sons of mind, divine beings who descended like a stream of brilliance across the horizon of time. With the flame of intellectual solar fire, the Manasaputras lit the wick of the latent mind, and humanity stirred into thought, choice, and destiny. Humanity, newly awakened, followed divine instructors as children followed their mother. These teachers established the primeval schools of art, science, agriculture, and moral living. In this golden age, truth was freely available and given to all. There was no secrecy. Then the intellect grew. The one mind became a double edged weapon. The higher mind and the lower mind. The higher, capable of sublime spiritual qualities and capabilities, while the lower, destructive. And then we have very interesting idea about Yama and Yami in this context, which is provided in the ancient scriptures, where Yama is the Sanskrit word of the personified third root race in occultism, and this is also mentioned in the glossary. In the Vedas, he is the god of the dead. Yama is the embodiment of the race which was the first to be endowed with manas or consciousness, without which there is neither heaven nor Hades. He had a twin sister named Yami, who was ever urging him, according to another hymn, to take her for his wife in order to perpetuate the species. Twins Yama and Yami live in a palace of copper and iron. They stand for dual manas. In the Hindu epic poems, Yama and Yami is the twin child of the sun, Vivasvat, by Sanjana, the spiritual consciousness, which we can think of as Buddhi. Yama, the symbol of spirit in the east, and Yami is the queen of night, the emblem of evil and matter. In Puranas, Yama has many wives, and that is many Yamis who force him to dwell in the lower world, Patala, Mayalba, etc., etc. And an allegory represents him with his foot lifted to kick Chaya, the handmaiden of his father, the astral body of his mother, Sanjana, that is Buddhi. So we see that there is a lot of deeper occult meaning in this particular hymn. Now, the student of esoteric philosophy will easily recognize the inner meaning which is provided here. In the previous talks, we have seen that higher ego cannot act directly on the body as its consciousness belongs to quite another plane and planes of ideation. In this context, we have a very interesting story from the Mandukya Upanishad. Here, we see one bird sitting on the top branch of a tree peacefully, calmly, with the light of Buddhi coming from Atman shining on it. At the same time, we have a bird on the lower branch of the tree which is feeding on the fruits of life, the pain and pleasures, and jumping from one branch to the another, running after more and more fruits. So here the bird sitting on the upper branch is the individuality, the higher manas, and we can refer to and correlate with Yama. And the lower bird is its reflection, the lower self, its action and behavior of the lower depends on its free will and choice. So it is again equivalent to Yami, what we just saw. And in every life, we have a new copy of or a reflection of the upper bird coming in again and again, running after fruits until one finds it learns the karma yoga and starts yearning to meet the bird on the upper branch. We can think of the upper bird as Yama and the branch connecting to the lower Yami as the Antakarna. So we see here that how the whole story of Mundaka Upanishad actually captures a very important essence and a very important information which needs to be thought about. Nature moves in cycles of fertility and barrenness. During the third root race on Lemuria, material expansion accelerated while spiritual power contracted. Humanity was divided into three groups: the resistors, those who upheld awakened spirituality, the vacillators torn between spirit and matter, and the laggards submerged in inertia, swept downstream. Spiritual truths became veiled, abused for selfish purpose, distorted into sorcery, black magic, and superstition. For some reason, it's stuck. And then we see a handful of primitive men within whom the divine spark of wisdom blazed ever more brightly, even as it waned with each passing age. Among those who misused it remained the chosen custodians of the mysteries bestowed upon mankind by the divine teachers. Thus were sown the first seeds of white and black magic. Long dormant, these seeds lay latent until they began to sprout in the early dawn of the fifth race, which is our known. So the true nature of mind remained concealed from the many, revealed only through the mysteries of the mind, only to the initiates. However, we have been provided hints, certain hints, and we will look into that. Now, that is why the reason is that mysteries of the mind are connected with the idea of initiation. So we see that all our experiences actually take place in our mind. From childhood till death, everything is actually playing in our mind, is happening in our mind, is being perceived in our mind. Here is an interesting excerpt from Secret Doctrine. The monad emerges from its state of spiritual and intellectual unconsciousness. It gets direct into the plane of mentality. There is actually no plane in the whole universe with a wider margin or a wider field of action in its almost endless gradations of perceptive and aperceptive qualities than this plane, that is the mental plane, which has in its turn an appropriate smaller plane for every form. So, from this perspective, if we see, the mental projection is primary. Entire world is a projection of the divine mind, the third logos, Mahat or Brahma. Similarly, on a microscopic scale, our entire life is our mind's projection only, and we'll see how this happens. So, there is this connection with the mysteries of initiation. And in the Mahatma Letters, we see in a very interesting quote that the individuality to run successfully its sevenfold downward and upward course has to assimilate to itself the entire life power residing but in the seventh principle, and then blend with the fourth, fifth, and seventh into the sixth. Now, here we see the fourth is the Kama, fifth is the Manas, sixth is the Buddhi, and seventh is the Atman. So definitely a very important hint is provided, and we need to look into the inner meaning of what is meant by the master here. Next, we see the connection with the mysteries of the mind itself. We all know that mind is the king of the senses, which are nothing but the extensions of the mind only. So if you see, in reality, the senses provide information to the mind, and they are like actual extension from the mental plane to the physical plane. Hence, from this perspective, the physical body exists only to sustain the senses. If you really see, all our senses are sustaining because of the food which we are eating, and the mind is relying on the senses as its own extension, which implies in this context the whole of physical body is nothing but the extension of the mind on the physical plane itself. Hence, every organ and every cell has its memory. However, Manas is the reflection of Atman via Buddhi. Hence, the body is reflection of Atman. That is, in other words, it is Atman on the physical plane itself. Now, mind as such is one, but again, we need to understand how it's working, and we have the higher aspect of the mind and the lower aspect of the mind. As per the definition provided of Antakarna, we have the higher mind pulled by Buddhi, Buddhi Manasic mind, lower pulled by Kama, Kama Manasic mind. But if you see really, the extension of the lower mind, the Antakarna, which is mentioned here, comprises of the whole mind. So the mind, in fact, which we are talking about is the lower mind, which includes from here itself till the mind which is engrossed into the material plane and enveloped with Kama. So let's consider the lower mind and Antakarna as one part. Now we will see a very interesting analogy. Think of a dark room, and let's pay attention to this because the entire presentation is based on this idea. Think of a dark room with no light, no window. The floor, ceiling and all the walls are painted black with no reflective paint. So there is pitch dark room with nothing in it. In other words, the room is there but not visible, seems to not exist. Now, if we have a small window opening and from where this light comes, then we see that the light of source, but the room is still dark because there is nothing to reflect the light. Not even the ceilings or the wall or floor is reflecting. Next, if we place a chair in the room, then we can see the chair, the object, since the light of the sun is reflected via the chair and enters our eyes. Similarly to this dark room is our lower mind, the Antakarna. But we may ask the question, from where is the feeling of I or I awareness coming? But before that, let's see that every thought which arises, there is a couple of things which is happening in parallel. A thought object arises either due to internal or external source associated with feelings, sensations, and associated elementals also arise. This bundle of thought and elementals can be termed as skandha for simple understanding. Here, elementals are centers of forces or energy. Now, similarly, we see the return of cyclic impressions or cyclic thoughts. If we were to throw a stone or pebble in a pond, the place where the stone falls, only from there we can see the waves or ripples arising, and then they go to the extreme boundary of the pond and then reflect back to exactly the same spot where the stone fell. Similarly, all our thoughts cyclically come back to us either from this life or past life if they are very strong. Now, skandhas are also known as heaps, aggregates in the Buddhist world, vasanas in the Vedantic world, and also samskaras, and seeds also in the Buddhistic world and also used in Theosophy. So these are all synonyms, but they are comprised of, generally speaking, in exoteric parlance, the rupa, physical form, vedana, sensation, feeling, sanas, sabna, the abstract ideas and perceptions, samskara, the tendencies, habits, and vinana or vijnana, the mental powers. These are also the source of the internal thoughts. And the master says that we can add to them two more, the nature and names of which you may learn hereafter. Suffice for the present to let you know that they are connected with the productive of Sakaya Diti, the heresy or delusion of individuality, of Athavada, the doctrine of the self. Let's try to understand this. But further, we see that whenever there is the thought arising, there is the thought which is behind desire, and behind will there is desire, and only after will there is action. So if the thoughts are engrossed in the materialistic world and we are looking for results and we get attached, we get bound to them, and that's how we are again and again creating more and more karma, and we are associating with it. So most of our thoughts, if we analyze from this perspective, are associated with the lower mind and kama, and associated skandhas and elementals, and the associated will and the action, which is the lower will. So this gives us a higher level of perspective to analyze our thoughts. So how this I is coming, which we just try to introspect. So if we look deeper into how this I arises in us, we see that there is this, we have the mind, the antakarna, and then we have a thought, which is also known as vritti, arising either triggered by the external object, as seen on the left by the senses, or by an internal object or a seed thought as seen on the lower right here. Now this thought which arises is also an object in the field of the mind. So this is an object in the field of the mind. Hence this thought object is temporary. It is born, it has a lifespan, and then it dies. This is similar to the dark room analogy. If we see, the antakarna is dark, no light until it is lit by the light of the Atman, but still nothing is seen, or rather perceived in this case, until there is an object, in this case a thought. But the moment the Atma's light falls on the upadhi of mind, not only does it illuminate the thought object, but it also generates a feeling of the doer, the I awareness, the ahamkara. Further, this reflected light of the Atman in the upadhi of mind is labeled as Jivatma, or I consciousness, or Chidabhasa, and as per Vedanta. And here the upadhi or vehicle of the lower mind is actually behaving like a mirror, and the reflected image is giving or forming the delusion of I. So let's try to further understand this. So here we see that the light of Atman shines in the upadhi of buddhi, that is the first level of Prakriti, and then via Buddhi shines in the higher Manas, the individuality. Now think of the next layer of Prakriti as the lower Manas, which is reflecting the light of Atman via Buddhi and the higher Manas as in like a mirror, thus creating a reflected image which it calls I. So in this case, the lower mind, the mirror, in this example, thinks the reflection in it is itself. It is the I consciousness. Now the question may be asked, what is the connection of this reflected consciousness Chidabhasa with the physical body, with the ego, the personality or the lower mind, and you, the real individuality or the higher mind? Now reflected consciousness will continue with the body as long as the body is alive. The moment this body dies, then this reflected consciousness or the personality will manifest in a new body. So this is similar to the lower bird, who is the projection of the higher bird. And in every new life, a lower bird is projected. Now what is the connection of reflected consciousness and ego? As long as the reflected consciousness is there, the ego is there. Think of reflected face in the mirror. Like reflection, the mirror are correlated. Similarly, the reflected consciousness and the ego, that is the personality. I am the body, my name is Mr. X. So finally, the important point is that what is the connection between the reflected consciousness and the real consciousness, that is the real you, the individuality? The answer is same as the reflected face and the real face. So the reflected face and the real face. But no connection as such, because when you stand in front of the mirror, there is no physical connection between your face and the reflected mirror or the face in the reflected mirror. However, the reflected face entirely depends on your face. So if mirror is taken away, then your face remains exactly the same, but the face in the mirror will disappear. So an important thing to note is that the reflection here depends on the quality of the mirror, how clean the mirror is, whether it is rusted or not, whether it has cracks. In short, what are the gunas and the skandhas of the mirror which determine the quality of reflection. So now, what is the relationship between the Atman, the Sakshi, and the reflected consciousness? The answer is, it is pure ignorance and made of the skandhas. For the time being, we can call this bundle of skandhas chitta. It is like if someone thinks that the person in the mirror is real. It's like saying, don't scrub or clean the mirror, it hurts. Handle it with care or I will break. But actually there is no need to be reflected in the mirror always, since you know who you are deep down in your heart. But the problem is that the reflected I in the mirror always feels the need to exist. So in this context, let's try to also understand what is happening with respect to the states of consciousness. Now, in the conscious waking state, we see the senses going toward the sense objects and feeding the mind. The mind is being observed by Buddhi, which in turn is being observed by the Atman, the real witness. So this becomes the waking state. Now, when the external senses are not providing inputs, and from the external world we are not getting any inputs, then the internal thought objects are arising based on the previous impressions and skandhas in the mind, whether from this life or the previous life. Like the dark room analogy, where we have a vritti known as the chair arising internally when it's being perceived by the light of the Atman. Further, then these are being observed by Buddhi and finally by the Atman. This state of consciousness can be referred to as the dream state. Now what happens when the lower mind, the Antakarna, withdraws? Then there is pitch darkness with no thought object, whether internal or external. Then even though the light of the Atman is there, it is as if the room doesn't exist, the initial state of our dark room. it is like the dark room which we saw initially, wherein there is no chair, no opening for the light of the Atman. This state of consciousness, we can think of it as Shushupti. Thus, all the three states of Atman, the consciousness, are due to its association with the Upadhi only, undergoing changes of states like waking, etc. Therefore, Atman remains as pure existence veiled by Maya. It is because of Maya that he appears as deluded, inert, ignorant, and so on. A very important point here is that Maya can be thought of as any vritti arising in the guna based upadhi of the lower mind, that is the antakarna. So the moment a thought arises, a vritti arises, Maya arises, and the kind of Maya which arises is dependent on the gunas of the upadhi. So what is the state of Turiya then? Now, in the case of Turiya, the fourth, the lower mind is completely purified, raised, so to speak, and becomes one with the higher mind. That's when we realize that the actual reality is the Turiya state, which is a substratum of all other states in which they arise, persist, and then disappear. While Turiya is always there, this is the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the constant state of a Jivan Mukta who have become the Atmajnanis. So we are in the fourth round. Hence we can see that the Kama element is very strong, or rather Kama Manasik. Fifth race means the Manasik element, or we can say lower Manasik. And fifth sub race, again we can think about it Manasik or lower Manasik. Hence, if we see that in this context, majority of our lower Manasik, subdivisions of lower Manasik faculties are being only used. Even if you consider the Kama Manasik or lower Manasik mind, majority of its potential is not tapped by humanity yet. And exceptions are always there. So, mind is akin to Antakarna. And when I am saying mind, we are only talking about the lower mind here. And the physical body, in this context, we can think of it as a projection of the mind. Hence, the entire physical body is a Kama Manasik projection and Tamasic in nature, in essence, if you really see. And mind is the projection of Atman via Buddhi. So, the physical body is finally actually in one way a projection of the Atman. And in this relation, we have also seen that there are a lot of mysteries which are connected with the Egyptian initiation mysteries. I'll just touch upon them, not get into much depth. But the initiation ceremonies in the Great Pyramid were related to this idea. If you see here, we have the pit, and then we have the queen's chamber, and then we have the king's chamber. So the midpoint is almost like the queen's chamber. And when the initiate or the potential disciple, spiritual aspirant, was in the pit, which is akin to the Kama Manasik aspect, puts in self-effort and rises up the shaft, reaches the midpoint, he, when successfully reaches and performs all the necessary duties and rites which are required, was provided the lesser mysteries and known as the Mastai. And further, when he put in more effort and reached the king's chamber, he reached the level of the greater mysteries, the Epoptai. Now, the details of this can be read in the recordings later. I will not go through this. You can pause this recording and see that. So the whole idea is this: the Antakarna itself becomes a sevenfold path, wherein you have the seven paramitas, seven initiation sounds and portals of the voice of silence. But the gradual purification of the mind, generation of the paramitas, constant devotion to the higher self is required for the unfoldment. And finally, as the last speaker mentioned, the final state is the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, where one has to maintain their state of consciousness. But how does all this work is something very important, because in practical life we need to understand how this is happening. So if we see, these are the sheets, we can visually see Atman is at the center, the Manas is the first which needs to be purified. And what do we mean by purification? We mean the skandhas which need to be addressed. So chitta shuddhi, or purification of mind, is high priority, and gunas in the mind along with the skandhas are creating this illusion of I, as we have seen, and the false idea of the doer. B.P. Wadia says that in the present cycle, our minds are separated from compassion and our ethical impulses are prompted more by our psychic and by our spiritual nature. So purification of mind is the removal from it of the psychic impressions and karmic influences. This is the first task. Now, as per the Gelugpas and the Yogacara school, we have the five senses: mind consciousness, and the Klishta Manas or afflicted mind, and Alaya Vijnana as the 8 aspects. But the very interesting part is the fourth one, the Alaya Vijnana, the storehouse consciousness, which is the repository of the karmic seeds. So here we see the function of Alaya Vijnana, storehouse consciousness, is to store and preserve all seeds. That is, every experience, every minute to every experience, thought, deed, action, perception which we have, not only of this life but all past lives. And these seeds along with the storehouse is the storehouse consciousness together, and the store for attachments and negative emotion based on ignorance about the true nature of things. So quickly, if we see what's happening here, from the physical plane we have a layer, point of contact, which crosses over to the astral and the kamic layer, and there are skandhas in each layer. The impulse goes to the brain consciousness. From there again an interface layer we have, whereas we have the point of contact and the skandhas are there. It reaches the higher manas, wherein the inputs are creating the storehouse consciousness with those skandhas at every moment, whatever inputs we are getting from the external world, and then they are being observed by buddhi under the light of Atman, which is the actual Kshetrajna or the witness consciousness Sakshi. Rest all on the left you see is Prakriti, hence Kshetra. So mind becomes a Kshetra and Atman becomes the Kshetrajna, the observer and the observed. Now here is the problem, that there are source of seeds which are coming from out and accumulating, and based on the attachment which we are having, the I consciousness, I am the doer, all wrong actions are being performed based on the likes and dislikes, etc. And the previous seeds are also there which are creating more and more attachments and delusion and ignorance. So there is a vicious cycle where we are stuck. So how do we come out of it? So here we see all that we are is a result of what we have thought, and all that we are is founded on our thoughts, because it's the chitta. Now in short, what happens is that we need to make buddhi act as a mediator, wherein external seeds or vrittis or thoughts or inputs, when they are coming, using our viveka, we are able to make the right choice, whether to go with the likes or dislikes or take the action of only performing our duty. Similarly, when internal thoughts arise based on our storehouse consciousness, that is chitta, we again make a right choice based on discrimination, viveka, and only performance of our duty. So taking this, finally we see that the dissolution of the mind needs to be performed, which means that what we are doing is, in this context, we also see in the transactions that the self is the real ego, the buddhi manas, the higher manas. It lives and acts on a different plane, therefore pure. So nothing can pollute it. But what is happening is the lower self, which is the emanation, the lower bird, that is creating the problem, and that is why it needs to be sort of dissolved. But what exactly this dissolution means? Because in every life, the lower bird, the Yami, is actually creating such kind of karma with which the higher ego, or in this case the higher manas, is getting involved and gets stuck in this cycle. So the whole idea is to work around this. So hence the need of dissolution of the mind, that is the lower kama manas, wherein the mind stuff chitta is the main cause, as we saw, and if there is chitta, the world also appears, because the whole idea of me, mine, the world, the people, or whatever our perception is, it's all in the antakarna only. Hence, with knowledge and realization, we need to work on the dissolution of the mind, which means that we have to take very good care of the lower mind, be vigilant, and dissolve it. So again, every action actually is swapping or updating the atoms, particles, elements, and elementals and skandhas of our mental upadhi. So here is where we need to be very vigilant. And at the same time, the idea is that we should not allow any wrong thoughts to enter our mind, so that it creates a kind of equivalent situation to a disease in the mind as a disease in the body. So what are the methods? We have seen that we have karma yoga, performance of our duty, which leads to cleansing of the mind. And then for that we need absolute detachment, paravairagya, and repeated effort, abhyasa, dwelling on the higher self. And bhakti yoga and sattvic food also is very important. So in short, if we see that it is working of all the yogas in parallel, but starting with karma yoga, because purification of mind is only provided or achieved by that, and then propelled by bhakti yoga, and finally jnana yoga and raj yoga, because only then we can reach that highest samadhi state. Now, last few points before we close, we need to understand that our body is actually like a temple, because whatever, as we saw, the body itself is the reflection of the Atman. Hence, in our heart itself, we have the light of the Atman. Equanimity of mind based on truth is important always. We have to offer all our actions, thought, speech, and action to the higher self. Be detached. And Swadharma means only performance of your duty. That means in whichever station of life, whichever position you are, you need to identify what is your duty. Only do that without any attachment, that is performing karma yoga. Because otherwise there is a lot of danger. And Shraddha means that we know deep down in our heart that this is right, that the teachings which we have been provided is right. Because that becomes a center to pull us towards the source. And we have seen in Bhagavad Gita that how it's important to do our duty. Otherwise, there will be a lot of danger, which is mentioned in 335. Finally, the last few points are that vichara, ahara, and vihara. So, ahara means the food intake, but also it means that whatever input we are taking from our senses, sound, images, whether we are watching TV, music, the entire world which we are taking in from our senses is actually ahara. So the ahara should be right. Not only food which we eat should be sattvic, but also the inputs. Whatever we see, whatever we hear, whatever we think, whatever we interact, the whole input from all our senses should be sattvic. Otherwise, it contaminates the mind. Similarly, the fifth aspect of food forms mind. So it's very important to make sure what kind of food we eat. And the purity of food is mentioned in Chandogya Upanishad itself, wherein it in fact it impacts our memory also. And Bhagavad Gita also mentions about ahara and mental impressions, how if they are not regulated, if they are not sattvic, they will corrupt our mind, and further delusion, further ignorance, further negative states of the mind will arise. Now, the other aspect is vihara, that is moving about activities which we need to do, which are sattvic in nature, and we need to avoid activities which cause agitation of the mind or anxiety of the mind, because all our life, everything should be streamlined for the chitta shuddhi or purification of the mind. So everything we do should be associated with that goal and end in mind. And finally, we see vichara. So always keeping the higher thoughts, Brahma vichara, Atma vichara, or the highest possible thoughts which we have, encouraging wholesome and harmonious thoughts, will lead finally to purification of mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vikash.